discussion on COVID-19 and cybersecurity in healthcare. We'd like to thank the CyberPeace Institute who initiated this discussion and Facebook for the support for this discussion. We're hosting this conversation that we'll be having at a time when many of us have been directly impacted by COVID and have lost friends and relatives, and the importance of healthcare infrastructure and its safety and security is being felt now more than ever. It's been a terrible and terrifying time for many of us. We're also in the midst of a national conversation on cybersecurity, but what's not being discussed as much as it needs to be is what we've seen over the past year or two in terms of cyber attacks on healthcare. And we hope that you leave this discussion with an understanding of cyber threats that our healthcare institutions face and what needs to be done going forward to secure them at an international level, at a national level, at an institutional level, industry level, because it's critical for us going forward to have healthcare facilities which are becoming more and more dependent on digital, remaining functional, especially in times of need. We have the privilege of hosting two keynotes from two of the most impactful people in cybersecurity, Ambassador Lata Reddy and Lieutenant General Dr. Rajesh Pant. We'll start our first keynote session, and I'd like to invite General Pant to deliver the opening address. General Pant is India's National Cybersecurity Coordinator. He is responsible for coordinating, for ensuring a secure and resilient cyberspace within the nation. He was previously the head of India's cyber training establishment for 3 years. He served in the Army Signals Corps for 41 years, where he was awarded 3 times by the President of India for distinguished service of the highest order. We're eagerly awaiting his national cybersecurity policy, which will help define the direction that our country is going to take, and the shape of our national cybersecurity landscape will be defined by this policy. Thank you for joining us, General Pant. We're honored to have you here. Over to you, sir.
Well, greetings of the day to everyone, wherever you are. And thank you, Nikhil, for inviting me to deliver the opening keynote address at the CyberPeace Institute, Geneva's discussion on COVID-19 and cyber attacks on healthcare. Healthcare has today become one of the most critical sectors. And I was just seeing Google Baba, and it told me that 28th July is also the World Hepatitis Day. So I think it's a very opportune day to talk of health, but it is also the day when the First World War started. And on a slightly philosophic note, I was taking my mind back to the first quarter of the 20th century and wondering what a challenging time it was for the world in general, and India in particular. Firstly, in the World War, while 1 million Indian soldiers participated, 75,000 died, and another 75,000 were wounded or missing. And soon after the First World War, we had the Spanish flu, in which while globally 50 million passed away, but I wonder if your audience knows this, 12 million, that is 24% of the deaths in the Spanish flu were those of Indians. It was a terrible time. And now after 100 years, there is another challenge to humanity in the form of COVID-19, which has so far in India claimed 4.21 lakh lives and affected almost 31 million of us. And while there is no accompanying visible world war this time, but there is a new kind of threat which is invisible and borderless, which is further exacerbating the health crisis. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the topic of the day, COVID-19 and cyber attacks in healthcare. With that as a backdrop, let me start with some statistics. And as per one research, there has been a 45% increase in cyber attacks on healthcare organizations worldwide between November and December last year. In the same period in India, there was a 37% increase in cyber attacks. Of these, ransomware attacks showed the biggest increase. While sectors outside the healthcare also witnessed an increase of 22% in cyber attacks in the same period. So healthcare was one of the most targeted sectors in recent times. And especially this aspect of ransomware that has crept in has created a very easy bait in the healthcare sector. Now, the general impact of cyber attacks on health infrastructure results in actions such as delays in treatments, cancellation of non-emergency procedures, theft of patient, customer data, intellectual property, or scientific research data, business disruption, financial theft, loss of revenue, costs associated with restoring operations and improvement to the cybersecurity defenses, regulatory fines, legal liability, reputational damage, and litigation from affected individuals, besides some of the others. So these are some of the impacts that take place due to cyber attacks. Now, what are the primary threat vectors? And I'll start with ransomware, because I said that it has today become very important. In fact, while last year I call as the year of phishing, this year I'm calling as the year of ransomware, especially with what has taken place in the United States. Some of the biggest ransomware attacks so far have been paid, including in the Colonial Pipelines case, the JBS Foods, etc. Besides, hospitals being targeted and cities being transmitted. So the ransomware gangs have shown their true colors amid the coronavirus emergency by continuing to infect hospitals when they were at least prepared. As a result of these attacks in the healthcare industry, critical processes are slowed down or become completely inoperable. Hospitals are then forced to go back to utilizing pen and paper, slowing the medical process. In January 21, researchers at one of the famous companies called Checkpoint found that ransomware strains called Ryuk and Revil have dominated this area of the threat landscape. And most attackers also follow what is called as a double extortion tactic. That means besides the data encryption, they steal the most valuable files so that their authors can pressurize the victims into submitting the ransom. The ultimatum is as follows: pay up or the patient's records will be uploaded in a public shaming site. The second most common attack in the healthcare sector has been data breaches. And according again to some researchers, the health industry experiences more data breaches than any other sector. In fact, let me tell you, in the dark web, while the credit cards are, or the information about the credit cards are sold as less as about $5, the cost of the personal health information goes up to almost $400. So that is the magnitude and the importance of the PHI, as just called, in the health sector. And why it is important is because it is used to create fake insurance claims, allowing for purchase and resale of medical equipment, and even procurement of some medicines which are banned and only prescribed to certain people. So, as I said, some criminals use this PHI to illegally gain access to prescriptions for their own use or for resale. So this is the next important thing, the data breaches on the personal health information. Next, of course, we have the very common DDoS attack, the distributed denial of service attacks in the healthcare sector, which is used by activists and cyber criminals to overwhelm a network to the point of inoperability. And this can pose a serious problem for healthcare providers who need access to the network to provide proper patient care, or need access to the internet to send and receive emails, prescriptions, records, and information. Now, another important type of attack is, or the threat I may say, is due to the insiders. while organizations are often too preoccupied with defending the integrity of their company and network from external threats than to keep track of the insiders, the insider poses a threat because the legitimate access they have to proprietary systems, thus able to bypass traditional cybersecurity defenses such as intrusion detection devices or physical security. Another type of attack is called the business email compromises. Some of you must have heard of that, where scammers use a spoofed email or a compromised account to trick employees into initiating a money transfer to an alternate fraudulent account. Now, this has many variations and could result in a loss of money from the corporate side, or goods, or even the prescription of drugs. In the recent years, and especially during the pandemic times, the aspect of data espionage and stealing, the research work which was going on for the vaccine has become very important. And cyber espionage, as you're aware, is the act of gathering information without the knowledge or permission of the holder of that information. And a nation state stealing pharmaceutical research data on COVID-19 vaccines is a good example. So there were other aspects like, compromised accounts, etc. Now, a word on why is healthcare the biggest target for cyber attacks. The first point, as I said earlier, is that the private patient information is worth a lot of money. Although with GDPR coming into play this year, it's becoming increasingly important for hospitals to keep their information secure, but the hospitals store an incredible amount of patient data, which is worth a lot to the criminals. The second point is that medical devices are an easy entry point for attackers. And you are aware as to how much of automation is there in the hospitals these days. So devices like X-rays, insulin pumps, defibrillators play a critical role in modern healthcare. And they are designed for one purpose, like monitoring heart rates or dispensing drugs, but they're not made with security in mind. Although the devices themselves may not store the patient data that attackers pursue, they can be used to launch an attack on a server to which they are linked and which holds that data. In a worst case scenario, a medical device can be completely taken over by the hackers, preventing healthcare organizations from providing vital life-saving treatment to patients. So the staff needs to access data remotely, opening up more opportunities for the attack. The third aspect of why healthcare is targeted is that the workers don't want to disrupt convenient working practices with the introduction of new technology. As we all know, healthcare staff are some of the busiest and most in demand in the country. They work long hours. We have glorified them, and in our recent COVID-19, called them the warriors, which they actually have been. So, which means that they have to keep with deadlines, and they don't have the time or resources to add online security processes to their workload. Furthermore, the healthcare staff are also not educated in the online risks, because medical professionals are trained to deal with a lot, but education in online threats is not part of their training or schedule, which is a point which must be discussed, and it should be brought, I think, in the syllabus of our medical colleges about the cybersecurity, including the IT as well as in the cyber physical systems. So budget, resources, time constraint means that it's simply not possible for all healthcare staff to be fluent in the best practices of cybersecurity. Another point is that the number of devices used in hospital makes it hard to stay on top of security. And modern healthcare organizations are responsible for massive amounts of patient data, plus an extensive network of connected medical devices. Then we also have that healthcare information needs to be open and shareable. After all, if you're doing a blood test, then it has to be put, in some server that is facing the internet from where the patient can access his data. Now that itself exposes the linkage to that particular hospital, and that is how the attacks can take place. Then even the smaller healthcare organizations are at risk because smaller enterprises are often seen as an easy target and as a backdoor access opportunity to target the larger enterprises. So there is a need for global attention towards cyber attacks on healthcare. Various working groups, which I was just seeing on the internet. There is something called CTI League, Cyber Volunteers 19, COVID-19, Cyber Threat Coalition, etc. And these are purely volunteer groups that have come up working on the principles of crowd security and crowdsourcing. So let me finally end on what India and its healthcare sector should do to determine the healthcare infrastructure. Firstly, as you all are aware, that India has recently launched the National Digital Health Mission. This is going to promote a large number of objectives. One of them is that everyone has a health ID. Then there's a concept of a digital doctor. Then we have a health facility registry, personal health records, and it will in effect lead to an improved health service delivery, if I may say so. And a large number of union territories, etc. I have the list somewhere as to who all have already been enrolled in this. Almost 3,000 doctors have been enrolled, and almost all our union territories are being made to implement this. Although in years to come, you'll find it rolling out to the other states, etc. So what we have to do is we have to prioritize the most critical data and cyber physical assets. Even within the hospital, see, everything may not be critical. There is an internet-facing network. There is something which is there in the reception, etc. But you have to do a risk analysis and see where your actual patient data is lying, etc. And also from the cyber physical system point of view, which are your most critical machines that need to be protected. So that is one of the first few things that organizations have to carry out a risk assessment and then ensure that the cyber defenses for these critical assets have been put in place. Then, against ransomware, we have to be very careful. There are a large number of techniques for anti-ransomware. Firstly, there are two types of ransomware, as you're aware. One is that your data is encrypted, and they tell you unless you pay this money in bitcoins or whatever, they will not give you the decryption key. The second is what is called as a data extortion. That means they have taken your data and they say that unless you pay the money, they'll put it out on the web and things like that. So one of the easiest techniques is what is called as network segmentation. So your entire network is divided into segments. Even within a cloud, the segmentation is done. In addition, the data backup is a very simple technique. So unless you're in an application like the railways, where every second there are thousands of people doing bookings and you just cannot lose any amount of data, I don't think hospitals are in that situation. Even if you take a data backup every, let's say, 6 hours or something, worst case scenario will be that your patient data of the last 6 hours may not be there, even if it is encrypted. So I would strongly suggest that this data backup plan be there, and you have your recovery systems and data recovery mechanisms, and you must practice them also. So while at a national level we have a cyber crisis management plan, but at an enterprise level also there should be a cyber crisis management plan that must be practiced. So there are other technical means of the domain blocking. And the CERT India keeps giving a lot of advisories and indicators of compromise, etc. And even for the insider threat, what they say is that you use your other employees. So the best way they say to detect an insider threat is often the other insiders. So you have to train your users and employees on how to recognize and report an insider threat or prevent them from inadvertently becoming one. And in this, AI also plays a major role. There are some artificial intelligence techniques which are practicing the behavioral analytics. So if they find that there is an employee who's working on an application that he's not supposed to use, or is working on an application for a time much longer than he's supposed to be on that, so they immediately, the red flags are put up and he comes under suspicion. So risk-based authentication, etc. And as I said, the aim is to increase your cyber hygiene, educate, train, practice, conduct tabletop exercise, and design cyber security measures from the initial stages itself. So there are a large number of actions that hospitals need to take, but let me end by saying that the World Economic Forum has also said that one of the biggest risk factors, and they called it a clear and present danger as far as the World Economic Forum is concerned, is due to cybersecurity failures in enterprises. So all the three aspects, that is people, process, and technology, have to be looked after. And as I said, there is no doubt that health sector is one of the most critical sectors. 100 years back, we made the mistake of forgetting its impact too soon. If we had learned our lessons and ensured that these things are not repeated, maybe things would have been different now. But since we are going through this crisis, let us not repeat the mistakes and the lessons that we forgot 100 years back. So on that note, I once again thank Mr. Nikhil Pava and the team from MediaNama for giving me this honor. And I wish all of you stay safe. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you.
Sorry, sir, I was on mute, but thank you so much for that address, sir. I had a couple of questions, including one that's come in from Gunjan Chawla on chat. Particularly, Gunjan's asking about, about whether there is a possibility of the Indian government designating healthcare infrastructure as critical information infrastructure. And I think that becomes all the more important given what you said about the National Digital Health Mission being rolled out.
Yeah, so that's a very relevant question by Gunjan. And as you're aware that we have created this organization called the NCIIPC, National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center. The NCIIPC has classified the critical sectors into 6 broad divisions, including the strategic sector and transportation and finance. BFSI is one of them, etc. So one of the sectors is the government sector. So within the government sector, we have this flexibility of not really going through the entire process, but picking up a sector like the health sector. And there is no doubt that the process is already on. The health sector is already has already approached the NCIIPC and recommended some of the systems which should be part of the protected systems as per the concept of NCIIPC. And in some of the other countries also, I have interacted with Australia and France recently, where they have proposed a new bill in their parliaments, where they have designated their critical sectors because they are getting it approved from the parliament, so that there are some mandatory guidelines which these sectors have to follow. So there's no doubt that healthcare has to become part of a critical information infrastructure. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Just you mentioned the National Digital Health Mission, and that's going to lead to digitization of data at an unprecedented level. But given how small clinics are, and it's going to lead to very non-secure endpoints. So, is there any move? And I'm afraid I don't know the National Digital Health Mission very deeply, but is there any move to have minimum security requirements to ensure that these endpoints are secure?
See, as far as endpoints are concerned, that depends on which enterprise they are part of. And as you yourself said, there are smaller enterprises and there are big enterprises. I have always been saying that try and spend at least 10% of your IT budget on cybersecurity for whatever enterprises there is. Because, it is two sides of a coin. Automation and cybersecurity go hand in hand. You cannot have one without investing in the other. So that is one part of it. And as far as the services are concerned, what I find is that some of the SMEs, I can give that example, I find that they prefer to go in for the managed services rather than have their own IT cell and cybersecurity professionals and CISOs, etc., because it costs money. Whereas, especially in the finance sector, you find they're really good in protecting themselves because of the corresponding data that they have to protect and the reputation that they have to protect. But coming back to your question on the digital health mission, it's a very valid point. Let me tell you, the Unified Health Interface, or the UHI as it is called, is also planned to be rolled out soon. And this interface shall enable the public and private solutions and apps to plug in and be part of the national digital ecosystem. So there's sort of an API is also coming out, which is called the UHI, right? And as of today, as we speak, 11.9 lakh health IDs have been generated. and 3,106 doctors and 1,490 facilities have registered on the platform. So this is work in progress. There is going to be a lot of movement in this regard on priority, but like you have raised the point, and in the position that I am in, we are going to ensure that we take these steps one at a time with security in mind. That's a very important point.
So Biju Nair has a suggestion saying that in the US and in the UK, the software bill of materials is made mandatory. Perhaps India could also consider that. So Vishal Gondal, one of our speakers, has his hands up. I think Vishal wanted to make a point, sir. Vishal is the founder of Goki, India's largest fitness tech company, sir.
Hello, sir. It was really nice listening to you. One of the points I wanted to ask you was, given the pandemic, we have seen very big adoption of all kinds of wearables from consumers. And a lot of these wearable devices are sending data directly outside India. A lot of the Chinese devices specifically has some very sensitive data which is stored not in India at all. So just like the financial data, is there any plan to make sure that devices and apps which are collecting data of Indian citizens have some kind of mandatory requirement to keep it secure? Because right now it is really being going all over the place.
Vishal, I think that's another very important issue that you raised, and I would like to bring it in the larger ambit of IoT. Because already these IoT devices, and in fact it's called, Cisco calls them Internet of Everything, etc. They started coming into the market, and security standards are not there. Singapore has started something called labeling, cybersecurity labeling of IoT devices, where they give you these stars like you have in the energy consuming devices. But we are really waiting for the PDP bill. I mean, I'm really waiting. I don't know about the others, but unless we have the legislation in place, how do we stop all these things? Because, firstly, they are making you agree to a lot of things which we don't read, right? And especially in the tier 2, 3 cities, rural areas, I mean, how do you expect them to read those conditions of legality? And then whether they're being followed or not also is not being checked. So this is a very serious problem. And unless we have the legislation in place, we really cannot, come down on them legally. But there has to be some checks. You are seeing the direction in which the government is moving. The GFR rules have changed. The trusted telecom policy has come. Yesterday, I was reading something about some chips being imported also. So you are aware of the direction in which we are moving. But I agree, we need to move much smarter. But it's a very important point that you raised.
So one last question, sir. And I know you're short on time, but you raised that important point of this being the year of ransomware. What can we expect from a policy perspective, specifically focused on healthcare, regarding ransomware, and how do we deal with that malaise, which seems to be really crippling many institutions?
So I think one good starting point is to learn from what is happening, in countries, let's say like the US, despite having the HIPAA and the high-tech and, all the other things that they started long back, still the ransomware attacks are going on. So what they have come out is that the NIST and some of the other organizations that they have for standard setting, etc., they've come out with a set of, steps that are to be taken at the user level and at the enterprise level against ransomware. So there are some good advisories in that. Our CERT-N has also issued a very good advisory on actions to be taken against ransomware. And as I said, there are a number of actions, the technical aspects and processes, and what cyber hygiene has to be done. So if one follows them, I think at least some part of it would be done. But a lot of international cooperation is also required in this. We have not discussed the dark web and what happens there, and that is where there is a site, you are aware, the ransomware as a service. So ransomware as a service, they have a list of companies and they have the revenues of those companies, and they tell you how much money you can extract as ransom from this company. So you give them their 20% and the rest of the risk you take, and then you can take the rest of the money. So recently there has been some action on behalf of Interpol, and some countries have got together. But this is another area where internationally we have to cooperate. But that is a separate discussion about the lack of international regulations, and MLAT is not working, and the letter of regulatory is not working. So I think that is another area, and maybe Lata Reddy ma'am is an expert in global cooperation in cyberspace. She can pitch in on that. But yes, I think ransomware is something that we have to learn to be careful against. Thank you.
Of course, and I think Shyam Krishna Kumar also raises a very, very important point about the fact that there is a shortage of cybersecurity personnel. He's also asking about what is the strength of cybersecurity personnel at NCI, PC, and certain. But I think across the industry, this is now becoming a very, very important need to fulfill, of having enough cybersecurity personnel. So I guess among skills and amongst, I think trainings would also be the order of the day.
Yeah, I mean, in the 2013 policy, we had made a commitment of training 500,000 cyber skilled personnel by 2018. In 5 years, we said we'll train 5 lakh. But somewhere down the road, the implementation, I guess, lacked, because the standard to which they were to be trained and who will train them. So there was no action plan in that, which we are now trying to overcome. And this strategy that I've been talking of, that gives out a very specific plan. But I find that already there is a program of MITI called the ISA, Information Security Education and Awareness, which is being conducted by CDAC Hyderabad. They're doing a good job in training persons. But in pockets, I can assure you that I speak to people every day. And today also, there was a gentleman who came who was telling me that he will train 1 lakh cybersecurity personnel over the next couple of months, etc. He has some technique for that, online technique, and he's got his learning management system also ready. So it's about 300 hours program. So and there are you speak to the IITs and the other institutions. They say that now the BTech and the MTech courses on cybersecurity are picking up. That's a new trend that is happening outside. So it has to be part of an ecosystem. The moment people realize that this degree will help us in getting them this job, and this job pays well, and the companies know that without them they cannot survive. So that ecosystem somehow has to be created, and it's happening. It's happening, and you find it that without cyber skilled people, it will be very difficult. Today, of course, in the new normal and the digital future that we have, this is going to be one of the hottest requirements.
Great, sir. Thank you. Thank you for that, sir. And I think, I'd love to find out who this person is who's got such ambitious plans for training, and if we can help in any way. But thank you so much, sir, for your address, for your inputs, and for taking questions. I know you're a very busy man, so thank you for taking time for this discussion, sir. Really.
You're welcome. Welcome. All the best. Stay safe, all of you, please.
Thank you, sir. So we'll also send you a copy of the report, sir,
Excellent.
that CyberPeace Institute has done on what policy changes might be required, in order to strengthen. But Bruno, who's the CTO of the CyberPeace Institute, is going to do a short presentation on the report. Please do stay with us, sir, if you'd like to. If you'd like to watch the session.
I'll listen for some time. And 2 persons I can straight away connect you with. One is Vineet of the CyberPeace Foundation.
Of course.
He's on the training, you know him. Yes. And the second is Mr. Balaji, who was the ex-CISO of IDFC Bank. You may have come across him also. Yes. So he's doing that. He's got an NGO which is doing this training part, besides many others.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
I'll be on listening watch.
Of course, sir. Bruno, thank you for joining us. We've been eagerly awaiting the launch of this, or your sharing of the findings of this report, particularly from an India perspective. But I think you have screen sharing rights, Bruno. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Nikhil. First of all, I'm very delighted to be here and to have this joint session with MediaNama. And before I start, and I will share some slides today, the report is an initiative that we started some time ago in last October, and we released it in March, and we did a thorough study on the healthcare because we believed there was a need for it. So it was to make a landscape of what are the issues and what could be the solutions. And before I start, I would like to thank Lieutenant General Rajesh Pants for his excellent address this morning, an excellent summary. He really pointed touch upon the main risk and also the important issues for discussion, especially for action. So today, in this presentation, I will go through the findings of the reports and also some actions that we need to take. But most of them has been mentioned already by Lieutenant General. So if we start with the findings, so that everyone has in mind what are the key issues. The first thing is in the report, the key finding is cyber attacks in cyberspace has a real impact in real life. It has an impact directly on people. That's really something that has to be kept in mind by everyone, especially those who maintain ICT services, who runs cybersecurity functions, but also at a higher level in organizations to take their own responsibility and accountability in order to be able to limit or mitigate the risk as much as possible. The second finding is attacks are really increasing in volume. If you look throughout the COVID crisis and since the beginning of the crisis, the attacks augmented by fourfold, so 400% increase of attacks. And as Lieutenant General outlined in last November, December, in 2 months' time, the increase was by 45% in only those 2 months. So we see a stark increase of attacks, and obviously we need to be prepared to face that. The third point is, unfortunately, attacking healthcare is a global and lucrative business. Obviously, criminals are present where it is lucrative and relatively risk-free. And we can see that cyber criminals too often, and nowadays are still the case, are acting with near impunity most of the time. So that's something we need really to act upon. The fourth finding is healthcare professionals and patients do not benefit fully from legal instruments which are already existing. We already have treaties, we already have laws, we already have norms, but they are not either very well applied or not well known or well implemented. As a side effect, we could see that during this COVID crisis, communities of cybersecurity professionals came together to volunteer and to give some free help to hospitals and the healthcare sector in general, so that they are able to face the stark increase of attacks and the stark also sophistication of those attacks. So today, if I may approach it like this, the first thing is why the healthcare is under attack. So the healthcare is under attack because it's a gatekeeper of obviously sensitive information. The stolen medical records are traded in the underground market with general profits. So as mentioned, it's around $400 per records. It can go up to $400 per records, which is much more than credit card numbers. Medical research and intellectual property is also a very profitable target for specific actors, especially in the cyber espionage and in the race of the vaccine research. The healthcare organizations are more likely also to pay ransom requests, since the service disruption can have a direct impact on patient health and impacting on the hospital. It seems to be likely to have a ransom paid, more probable than any other sector. Another factor is the nature of the internet is global. So obviously it's a global phenomenon. So it's not a national, it's not a regional phenomenon. is really a global one. So cooperation is really important. Exchange of information is really important. But also the sector is a target of choice for both cyber criminals and state actors, for financial gain, for data leakage, for following geopolitical agenda. So in the pandemic, we saw an emergence of three main malicious activities. Obviously, you have many more, but we have ransomware attacks, data breaches, and disinformation operation. Why this healthcare suffer from a number of vulnerabilities? So it is at different level. The healthcare organization, they operate often a complex, vulnerable, and sometimes outdated infrastructure. So when an hospital buy, for example, MRI device or devices which are really expensive, the return on investment means that this device has to be kept for quite some time, and this device may be coming not supporting over time by the vendor anymore and not updated in terms of patch or etc. This creates really weak points in your infrastructure if you're in this situation. We saw also why some minority of big healthcare actors have deployed major cybersecurity programs, so they know the problem and they act upon it very quickly and with the right response. We have a vast majority of smaller actors in the sector suffering from a systemic lack of resources to secure infrastructure, to train personnel, and to hire and retain cybersecurity staff. Globally, it's perceived that around 2 to 3 million jobs are not being fulfilled in cybersecurity, and this is really a domain where we really like people there. So we need to reskill, upskill, train more people as fast as possible. Obviously, the consequences is it prevents proper protection, preparedness, and exercising, and it decreases the response efficiency if you are lacking people to be able to properly secure your infrastructure. And finally, the healthcare sector spends less in cybersecurity budget than the average. So usually, you tend to spend 50% of budget in cybersecurity, and we saw that this number is much lower in the in the healthcare, which is around 4 to 7%. So this budget issue should be really addressed as fast as possible by top management. Who are the victims? Obviously, you have a variety of factors in healthcare. You have the healthcare sectors by itself, like hospitals, medical facilities, research centers, laboratories, health insurance company, health ministries, civil society, pharmaceutical companies. But it's not only that. You have a kind of ecosystem, a kind of interconnection with also supplier, manufacturer of products and services. But you also have the end user, like the patient, the healthcare professional, individuals, doctors, and it has also an impact on the society as a whole. If you look at the impact or at the attacks on the healthcare sector over the last 3 years, around 93%. I repeat, 93% of the healthcare companies or entities in this sector have been hit by some sort of cyber incident or cyber attack. So this is not that anyone is immune, but this is when this entity will be attacked. And I repeat again, the increase in this sector in terms of attack is fourfold in 2020. So we cover many examples in our report, but I can take the example of Dr. Reddy's laboratories in India in 2020, which was hit by a ransomware attack, and they temporarily shut down key plants in the US, UK, Brazil, Russia, and obviously India. And there was also suspicion of data leaks shortly after, especially on COVID-19 vaccine trials. So you can really have an impact not only at the business level, but you can also have an impact at the human level. And I will come back to it a bit later in this presentation. If we look at the top 3 threats, ransomware, which is now the most prominent and continuously evolving threat. Second one is cyber espionage, which is a covert threat, a bit particular. And we talked also about the and infodemic, which is underestimated. If we look at the first one, ransomware. Ransomware is not something new. It has been seen the first time in 1999, and it was already targeting the healthcare sector. So it was a scientist at the World Health Organization, its conference, which distributed 20,000 floppy disks containing a Trojan, and the person coming back home and inserting this floppy disk got infected, and this person was asking for money or wire payment to a Panama account. Obviously, nowadays it has evolved so that the victims have to pay and a way of paying which is more, which is quicker and more secure. And obviously, that's why virtual currency like blockchain or Monero is obviously used for that. We see also a strong evolution in ransomware, where initially it was more like opportunity targets, which is wide infection with affordable ransom to pay, so with little ransom, with little incentive for the victim to report to the police. And now those groups are becoming more sophisticated, and the market is developing. I mean, the market of ransomware as a service due to the pandemic, and they are much more organized. So they really target their victims and therefore asking for higher ransom to pay. If you look at the curve of average ransoms to be paid in 2018, sorry, it was around $6,000 for a ransom request demand, which demultiply in 2019 to 84,000 as an average, and 2020 is believed to be between $180,000 and $230,000 for an average demand. So if we look at more statistic, in overall, it costs to companies globally an estimated $20 billion. So this $20 billion is not only obviously in ransom, but you need to also to recover from a ransomware attack. So you need to stop an infection. You need to recover from batch and restore data, to test system, to patch, review access, network infrastructure segmentation. We talked about it. So this is a lot of work, which costs a lot of money for a company which has been impacted. The average time it takes for a company to recover from ransomware can take a couple of days, but as an average is around 18 days. It has been estimated to be 18 days. So it means that during those 18 days, you run with no operation or no business, or with minimum business in your company, and this can really have a big impact on your company. It is estimated that 25% of victim pays, and that 50% of companies are not ready to face ransomware attack today. So those who are obviously not ready and those who are paying is usually they do it because the value of the file can be much higher than the ransom itself. They pay because they need to restore as fast as possible because it's a critical service. But obviously the advice is not to pay, and try to avoid as much as possible to pay, because first, there's no guarantee at all to be re-victimized, so to be attacked again. And also, usually when someone is paying, cyber criminals are putting those victims into a list of good customers to be targeted again. So this is something which is not advised, obviously. The second level is cyber espionage. So this is a bit different motives than from cyber criminal, which is purely financial gains. The motives here are more on intellectual property theft, more on intelligence gathering about the victim, and the last one is to attempt to the reputation of the victim. So if we looked at the modus operandi on that space, obviously you have a reconnaissance and preparations phase, and but once you are targeted, obviously the entity will try to infiltrate network or devices like phones, laptop, etc. So if you heard about the Pegasus revelation recently, this is typically in this space. The second one is to maintain access, temporary or permanent, in a network, to enable remote access, and to also move laterally and infect deeper your network. One important element is usually, especially for cyber espionage, the tools or the software will try to cover tracks, clear traces, logs, self-destroy, memory resident malware, etc. And the goal is really in threefold. Obviously, the first one that everybody knows is to steal data or exfiltrate data, which can be intellectual property, strategic planning, marketing plans, financial resources, etc. But it's also used to disrupt services, to prevent part of all the services to operate, and then to erode trust in system, obviously. And the third one is to really have also some ability to manipulate some data so that it alters the decision making of the victim, or to discredit the integrity of this victim in regards of external stakeholders. The third element is disinformation and infodemic. So what it is and what is the difference? So infodemic comes from information pandemic. This is the word that the World Health Organization has created a few months ago. Infodemic is in fact an overload of information, often false or unverified, about the problem, especially in a major crisis, driven by fake fabricated information, or driven by cyber operation that modify, alter, or falsify genuine information. So you really have two sides of the coin here. One is the best known, which is the information-enabled cyber operation, where you have trolls or trolls farm that will post fake information into social media, for instance, but they will always hook this fake information with some piece of truth in order to be able to convince the reader that this fake information is in fact true. So there's always a canon of truth. The second one is cyber-enabled information operation. I was mentioning before, is an entity who will modify data in the victim's network to alter decision making. And this one can really have very strong consequences. So if you look at the report, I believe there's a case we covered in Georgia, where the Ministry of Health got hacked, and some information about the COVID insider database were changed, so that the information they were talking about were not completely accurate, and without detecting that it was changed. The impact now, this is one of the most important parts of the report. It's obviously business and economic, that we all know that, but we cover in the report also physical impact on people, psychological cost, and societal cost. So what do we mean about all those four? First of all, business and economic cost. So this is a traditional that obviously data breach is costing a lot of money, especially in the healthcare sector, which is around 60% greater than other sector. Financial costs in the immediate aftermath of an attack can be really huge, and cannot be quantified in advance. So you need to have some cash to be able to cover that. Intellectual property loss can be years of R&D, can be gone in seconds. Business disruption and closure are increased after a compromise. Around 60% of companies bankrupt within 6 months after a cyber attack. Here I'm talking about more smaller actors. And obviously reputational damage can be irrevocable and beyond repair. So failure can and will live forever in the internet, breathing a company indefinitely. So managing reputational damage is really, really costly. If we look more at the human side, physical impact on people, obviously, it delays care, delays patient care. It certainly endangers life. If you look at what happened at Düsseldorf hospitals, where patients were redirected because there was a ransomware attack on the hospital that was supposed to receive this patient, and we couldn't give care. This patient was redirected to another hospital and unfortunately passed away in between. So it can really have an impact on the healthcare sector, despite the fact also that those ransomware operators mentioned that they will not attack the healthcare sector. They announced that mid 2020, but in reality, we see that they still target them. Obviously, you have also psychological costs. So those psychological costs is obviously medical staff are tired, having long shifts. They are stressed because of the COVID situation. And it creates some anxiety in the operating system, fear and sense of lack of control, operating system, so that they don't become the weak point, introducing this vulnerability into their network. The societal cost is more on disinformation part, where obviously fake information has an erosion of trust in and within the sector, but not only in the healthcare organization, but also distrust in authorities. And it's also in their ability to protect public health and provide emergency response during disaster and a crisis at a proper level. So it creates a climate of fear and distrust in healthcare sector, but also in authorities. So consequences of this information obviously can be very far-reaching. The last part is about
last 5 minutes.
Yes, I'm finished in 5 minutes. Yes, the last part is about the legal ecosystem. Obviously, to make perpetrators accountable, we already have a wide panel of law, norms, and treaties. So if we look, we have human rights law, international laws, some international treaties, domestic laws, but also some voluntary non-binding norms. And usually, government needs to strictly enforce and prosecute, enforce prosecution and extradition of criminals, better investigate asset tracking and freezing assets, criminal assets, with a focus on cryptocurrencies, and facilitate international cooperation, notably cross-border access to data. Because today, no one state, no one company can solve these issues alone in isolation, so cooperation is much needed. So I can take as an example the Budapest Convention, which is around 20 years old now, which has been ratified by 66 nations. I believe that India has not signed yet, but the convention is really good on being sure that there's an harmonization in legislation, there's a domestic and international investigations, there's public-private cooperation, and there's a strengthening of the criminal justice capacities globally. And there's a new version that has been released a few years ago with improved international cooperation, and especially also access to evidence in the cloud, because obviously more and more computing are done in the cloud, and this is often overlooked and not well covered. So there's an initiative around that make states and especially investigative teams to have access to this evidence. And last slide for today is obviously it's not desperate. There are opportunities for states and healthcare industry. So for states, you have a number of recommendations we have put into reports. Obviously, the most important is to ensure the rule of law. Another important is preserve sovereignty. Obviously, in the healthcare sector, what is important is respect and ensure the right to life, health, and seek and receive information, and that medical units, transport personnel are protected at all times. So upgrading the healthcare sector to critical infrastructure is a good idea. But there's a lot of work, a lot of implications, especially legally also. And that has to be planned at the highest level, at the governmental level. Also making best use of cross-border cooperation mechanism is really important, and imposing punitive measures on threat actors and intermediaries is really, really important. On the health sector and the industry in general, let me in general outline the security by design. This is really important. We need more secure product, especially in the healthcare, more secure product and services. Also, we need to comply to different regulations based on your customer base and on your operations. And what is a trend that should be more developed is to inform about vulnerabilities. So whenever a vulnerability is found, is really to share within the sector, but within the cybersecurity industry to be able to solve it as fast as possible, so that fixed as early as possible with the aim to protect end users and patients ultimately. That's all for me today regarding this report. I'm open, obviously, to questions, and obviously after the conference, if there's a need to answer additional questions, I will be happy to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. There's a question from an anonymous attendee whether you've also considered the malicious use of healthcare data by illegal organ harvesting actors and criminals.
Yes.
Is that something that you'd also gone into for the report? And
we haven't gone extensively on this, but we found several cases where there was some manipulation of data, and usually it's more following a certain geopolitical agenda, or to follow maybe certain conspiracies to help develop certain way of thinking, which are not based on real fact and based on scientific findings, and it's also to attempt to the reputation of a certain victim. So in the case of a health ministry, obviously, is to attempt the reputation of how this country is well controlling or handling the COVID situation, for instance.
Right. One of your recommendations is to hold actors who conduct these cyber attacks to account. But then, how do you reconcile that with the issue that it's next to impossible to do attribution of cyber attacks?
Yes.
And we haven't really seen, especially in India, we haven't really seen in prosecution of any entity for example, ransomware attacks. So in the light of a lack of punitive action and even attribution and evidence, how do you see this getting resolved?
Yes, this is an excellent question. In fact, attribution is one element of the whole chain. So obviously, when an attack happens, there's a chain of events that made it happen, right? So it's not only punitive measures on the malicious actor, right? For instance, you have the whole supply chain that might be have been compromised. So each actor in this supply chain has a role to play and has to be sure that has done his own job. So bringing more responsibility and accountability on all stakeholders. So it can be a software provider, it can be a device manufacturer, but it can be also hospital cybersecurity team, hospital management, enforcing or attributing the right budget, or the government applying policy that is strong enough that hospitals have to comply to, so that they are not targeted as much as they are now. So each and every one of the stakeholders has his own responsibility to take. We want to advocate at the CyberPeace Institute more the positive side than the negative side. So we want to monitor and also surface the good behavior and the good actor in the sectors that are implementing good cybersecurity.
So there's a question from Mr. Deepak Maheshwari, who used to be with Symantec, and before that he was at Microsoft. He's asking about whether we have any information on Indian investment in cybersecurity as a percentage of budget across sectors in general and in healthcare in particular.
Yeah, the numbers we found is more globally. So the number I mentioned, between 4 and 7% of ICT budget dedicated to cybersecurity is more global view. We haven't, unfortunately, have a number specific for India, but if there are some companies or cybersecurity professionals who would like to work on that, on country specific, we'll be happy to develop that.
Bruno, what do you think about the idea of cyber insurance to cover ransom payments? Is that a solution to ransomware attacks?
Yes. This is a very tricky subject, or tricky point to solve, because that's a very difficult question. On one hand, cyber insurance, they are there to ensure for a victim that they could transfer the risk and have a chance to recover as fast as possible. But on the other hand, some may argue that it purely finances cybercriminality and contributes to the phenomenon of higher and higher ransom, right? Especially since in certain attack scheme, it seems that criminals select their target based on this particular point, that those victims are having an insurance who would pay the ransom. So this is a vicious circle that we need to discuss and find out with the cyber insurance or with insurance sector in general, how we can solve that. Certain countries have taken steps to make it illegal to pay ransom, and in my opinion, it will certainly generalize. And this is also a problem when you prevent someone to pay ransom. It means that it can take much longer to recover. So the answer is really not easy to say, do I have to pay or not? It's really a tough decision.
So just one last question. We're running a little short on time, but how do you? What is your perception of threats evolving in the sector and involving, especially given the digitization of medical services? General Pant spoke about the National Digital Health Mission and the evolution of health ID as a unified health interface. So, as a patient, should I be concerned about the risks that telemedicine and digitization of services would create? And what would you suggest that the industry do as a means of addressing these concerns? Because it's almost as if the patient is helpless in these situations.
Yes, obviously. I forgot the first part of the question, please.
No, so look, there is a massive amount of digitization taking place. Yes. In terms of data, in terms of telemedicine, and so as a patient, I'm very concerned about the risks that it entails for me. And so what would you suggest the industry do from here on in order to mitigate some of these risks? Because once broken, that confidence will be hard to bring back.
Yes, yeah. Obviously, the dependency on cyberspace or digital world in general is more and more prominent, and will not go back from that, right? So we need to address that as best as we could. Today, we see that many actors or many entities, they are not mature enough into being able to have a minimum cybersecurity standard or cybersecurity hygiene. So what we usually recommend is we need obviously the higher management buy-in and have them understand that this issue is really critical as something to address as early as possible. And we approach it obviously at 3 different angles. First, at the process level. So obviously, organizations need to know their position in terms of how mature they are. So they can do an assessment like the NIST cybersecurity framework. They need to define acceptable target level for each function into their organization and to implement it as fast as possible. On the people side, which is the second level, is to have a strong cyber hygiene awareness program. But here is having programs which are creative, like a poster, screensaver, video campaigns, contests, because people tend to learn more easily from fun or having things which are quite outside the formatted text sent in a PDF or whatever. And to continuously train cybersecurity personnel, because this domain, it goes so fast that criminals are quite sophisticated and change their modus operandi quite often. So training cybersecurity personnel is key. And the last one, on the technical level, to have a gradual maturity approach, obviously adopting ICT management use-based practice framework like ITIL for patch and vulnerability management is the first level. Second level is backup archiving, especially archiving to prevent infection. Third level is network segregation. Fourth level is strong access control with MFA or 2FA. The fifth level is conditional access control. Sixth level is privileged access management, and the latest level, and you can really limit ransomware, is zero trust, where you encrypt all your data in your databases, and if this data is exfiltrated, it will be of no use for the criminals.
Great, Bruno. Thank you. Thank you so much for a really interesting presentation. We've given a link to the report, and we'll share it as well to anyone who wants to view it. And in case you have any additional questions for Bruno, please do get in touch with me. I'm happy to forward them to him to address. We'll move on to a third session for the day, for which we have a great panel. Pallavi Bedi, Senior Policy Officer at the Center for Internet and Society, is joining us. Arvind Sivaramakrishnan, the Group CIO of Apollo Hospitals and its group companies, one of India's largest, in fact, Asia's largest healthcare service providers. Niranjan Ramakrishnan is the CTO of the Let's Dental Lab group and CEO of My Lab Connect. It's a SaaS platform, but he was also previously the CIO of Sir Gangaram Hospital, and as well as the Kaveri group of hospitals. Vishal Gondal is the founder of Goki, an Indian fitness technology company that offers wearable fitness band with a mobile app and personalized remote coaching. And in just interestingly, in December last year, India's apex drug regulator granted medical device registration to 3 devices from Goki. So the security of devices is also something that we're going to get into in the session. Thank you all for joining us. I'll start with you, Pallavi. Can you tell us a little bit? I know General Pant spoke about it briefly, but can you tell us a little bit about what India is doing in terms of digitization of health records, and what are you seeing at the ground level, and what needs to be done to ensure that this data remains secure?
Thanks, Nikhil. So as we all I think know that India started the digitization of basic infrastructure in 2006. It came out with its starting the digitization of delivery services, and then sometime around the same time in 2000, they started doing a lot of health policies were coming out at that point of time. And in 2017, let's just take a step back. In 2004, after the tsunami thing, India started the Integrated Disease Surveillance Program, which was a physical disease surveillance program that was going around. And then they started in 2000, and then in 2017, they started the national, I'm rambling a little bit. In 2017, the National Health Policy came about. Right. And around the same time, they started the NITI Aayog came out with a health stack, and the Disha Act came about, which is the Digital Health Act. All of this was basically looking at health from different sectors, different points, and to sort of a convergence had to come about, so that to convert all of these different the health stack, Disha Health Act, as well as the digital this e-governance, the digital e-governance platform that was going around, rolling out, as well as the digital, the surveillance plan that had been rolled out, which is a physical surveillance plan. There was a plan. Then they said the thought that there should be a blueprint or digital health blueprint, which needs to come out and which needs to be rolled out. And that's why sometime in 2019, National Digital Health Blueprint came about to look at basically coming out with what is now the Digital Health Mission, but to come out with a Digital Health Mission plan. And for that, a blueprint came about in 2019, around that time. And then in 2020, last year, is when the Prime Minister announced the National Digital Health Mission Plan, which General Pant referred to. What the blueprint basically talked about was utilization of using digital services for providing health services across the country, and for empowering more doctors and citizens so that they have access to health records. Basically, the point was that health records are scattered across different people. People don't have access to all health records. If I'm in one state, I go to another state, I can't carry my health records. How do I transfer it? How does it become portable from one hospital or one health clinic to another health clinic? And that's the basic plan of the health, the blueprint. And that's why the mission came about in 2020, which was in the middle of the pandemic. So the pandemic sort of coincided, the mission sort of coincided with the pandemic. One of the main points of the mission, if you look at, is to create a unique health identifier, which is supposed to, health ID, which is supposed to be linked to your electronic health records. So basically, it's sort of a longitudinal thing. So your health ID is created, all your health records that are there across from all your blood reports, your doctor medical reports. So it's in one place, and that health ID, you can, if you give consent to the doctors, they will have access to your health records, whichever hospital you go to. So if I shift from Delhi to Bombay and I go to different doctors and I have a health ID, so then they will, I don't have to physically carry my records. They will have the access. That was the intention or the basis, or one of the basis of the health mission is to do that. So that is how, I mean, sort of the culmination of various health policy, the various digital health plans that have gone about is coming to the National Health Digital Health Mission.
So what do you think needs to be done to ensure that this data remains secure, especially at a ground level? Like, what are the challenges that you see at a ground level?
So there are obviously, I mean, one of them is, I mean, one biggest challenge is we don't have no data protection bill, which is a given. We don't have data protection bills. We also don't have a great internet connectivity also. So I mean, it's a challenge also in the sense that, I mean, there's a major urban-rural divide. So there will obviously be a major challenge in that. Even with hospitals or small clinics that are there, even in urban India or in rural India, where their security systems for protecting such data may not be sufficient. They may not be even aware of the kind of security system that they need to have in place, to put in place. For example, I think General Pant also referred to that. So there is no, I think, national security system that these hospitals do. Like one hospital in Delhi may have one system. If I go to another hospital, they may have a completely different system to safeguard that my personal data, which again, going to different states will obviously, and going to rural India may obviously change completely. In that sense, I don't even think that's a priority. I think General Pant also referred to that. Prioritizing health data in that sense may not be a priority in health, in government hospitals, or not even government hospitals, in small clinics in rural India, and protecting them might not be the biggest thing. And in the absence of any law, any legislation, either a personal data protection bill or any specific law which deals with health data particularly, and protecting health data particularly, that obviously becomes area of concern.
And what do you think are the risks that are created, especially at a ground level, by data breaches or mismanagement of data in the healthcare sector?
So I think just because it's health data, right, it is sensitive data, which the PDP will also recognize. Health data is going to be such, and it's going to be data which is, I mean, to every individual, their data is very sensitive, and everybody is very concerned about their data. Now that could be, I mean, depending on who's breached it, what is the purpose of the breach? It could be used for some things like a blackmail or exploiting something. If it's breached, and especially if suppose sensitive health data about LGBT community patients or AIDS data or leprosy, something like that, and that is still, which is very stigma, which diseases come with stigma attached to it. In that sense, you see breach, it also raises stigmatization of those individuals, and it raises concerns about whether those people will get proper access to health testing, and whether individuals are even comfortable going to hospitals. So if I think that a particular hospital has breached, or my health data has been breached, I may not even be comfortable going to doctors after that. Is it going to be secure? If I go there, will my data be secure? And I think we've seen this in COVID times, right? COVID also brought about the fact that a lot of patients were not going to hospitals for various reasons, because it was obviously COVID. And there were concerns that you were hearing about some hospitals having, not hospitals, but clinics suffering from some breaches and breaches happening around. So there are concerns about, obviously, and especially in a COVID time, your COVID data, patients' data might be manipulated or accessed, including that whatever health data that would have obviously shared with the hospitals that gets compromised. So those concerns are, I think the basic is it obviously will damage the security of the healthcare system and the trust that individual has with that particular hospital or the particular doctor, whether I would feel comfortable going there and sharing that data, because I don't know who's going to use it and what's going to happen to it at the end of the day, and what remedy do I have about it? How do I even get redressal of that grievance?
Absolutely, and it's not just systems, but even willfully some of this data gets shared about. Let's not forget that about a year ago or a year and a month ago, there were lists of COVID positive patients that were circulating on messaging apps, and there were stickers that were being put on houses, which were effectively compromising people. But I'll move to Vishal, because Vishal, you're a big believer in data and healthcare. Much of your business is built around this idea of data. Can you what needs to be done from a data security perspective? We'll talk about device security later, but just from a data security perspective, what needs to be done?
See, first of all, I think one big challenge in healthcare is people don't understand the seriousness of how important this data is and how can it be misused. Example of, people will know what your health condition is. That clearly is an issue. But for most people, they think, big deal. It's not causing financial loss. When people look at financial data, they understand that, my bank account could be wiped out, or, fraud could be done and so on. But in healthcare, there is a general lack of awareness that how can this data be misused? And I just want to point out two things on how serious this problem is. Early this year, the US National Counterintelligence and Security Agency came up with a report which talked about China's collection of genomic and other healthcare data from Americans. In HIPAA's environment, the official US government report says that this data was scraped, stolen, bought. There were massive amount of data of actual underlying healthcare is now leaked out to people. And just imagine, losing your DNA is not like you losing your credit card, which you can change tomorrow. Your DNA is unique to you. But this DNA information, coupled with so many other things, can be used to make custom diseases, custom viruses. It can be used to create all kinds of simulation and tests on your data. So there is a massive security and national security risk when it comes to all the underlying data of health. The second thing, which is also equally important from a data security, especially when it comes to healthcare's perspective, that we are forgetting that General Pant talked about the price of data. Healthcare data is $500. Well, financial data is $4. So why are people willing to pay $500 for healthcare data? It's because this data can be used for so many more things. We are right now in a biotech revolution where entire business, simulations like Moderna vaccine was completely simulated and tried out in data environments. So what could literally happen is that if they have data of 100 million people, their computer models can directly use this health data and start simulations. So effectively, you will be participating unknowingly in clinical trials across the world. Of course, I don't even want to go to the other risks which can be very highly criminal in nature. For example, we are now talking about connected devices getting embedded in people. We are talking about insulin pumps which are connected, or pacemakers which are connected. Now imagine if somebody can hack into a pacemaker and say, please deposit $1 million or I will be stopping your pacemaker. Or I can pump in 20 more units of insulin in your body. So I think with this whole connected devices space, data just flowing completely out of control, there is a massive risk. Which is why when we talk about data security, while we look at financial data with a kind of respect for some reason, I don't know why we are not extending the same respect to healthcare data. In fact, it's unfortunate, if you in Mumbai, you can eat bhel puri and you will find the bhel puri in one medical report most of the time. that is the situation in a lot of places, right? So I think the problem is right from the healthcare providers onwards, and again, when it comes to the government, I think the PDP bill and the data security and national security all are tied into this. Lastly, last year there was this big report with Fitbit, where Fitbit data was used to actually locate US military sites, because they were looking at walking patterns and other patterns and easily able to locate where sites were. Now imagine in India, we have millions of Chinese devices lying around, and so many people are using these devices knowingly and unknowingly. All this is exposing a lot of stuff which is outside our country. So I think I can't just emphasize on how important this entire area is. And I'm glad that government is talking about it, and there is debate around policy around this.
And in fact, Vishal, I remember, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, I don't quite remember which app it was, but it had the data had leaked, and someone had basically mapped out the world with that in terms of a heat map. And one could see movements of troops in Kashmir and in parts of Israel based on that. I think that was the Strava heat map, if you remember.
Yeah,
this was about 4 or 5 years ago, right? But
Strava heat map. So all this is exposing so much.
Yeah. So what do you think needs to be done from a data security perspective, Vishal? What are your solutions?
See, there are three areas here, right? First is awareness. At least in financial data, people are aware, don't give your OTP. There is some basic level of awareness. In the health data, there is no awareness, even at a provider level. Leave the consumer. Even the providers, I don't see them handling this data with that much care and respect. So first of all, there needs to be a much higher level of awareness. The second thing after awareness is there should be clarity of policies when it comes to healthcare. US is the best. HIPAA, everybody spares by HIPAA when it comes to the US. And in spite of HIPAA, you can see there is massive leakage of information. I mean, in spite of having such a tight regulation. Similarly, in Europe, the regulations are becoming more and more tighter. Because remember one thing, all these companies, whether it is Google, whether it is Facebook, whether it is Apple, they are all now trying to enter healthcare. If you look at their plans. Now, the minute we are talking about healthcare, we are suddenly talking of connecting health data with behavior data, with search data. Right now, we were not looking inside the biometrics of people. So the repercussions of this is going to be multifold, because what we have currently seen is the internet powered by data, which was largely transactional data or social media data or search history. Imagine, so just to give you an example, the Goki device captures 25,000 data points a day. 25,000 data points per person per day is what we capture on this, which includes heart rate, temperature, SpO2, blood pressure, steps, etc., etc. Now multiply this the minute other devices. I believe in the next 3 to 5 years, your wearable along with your phone will do 90% of diagnostics, including your blood sugar levels, etc. And each person will have 1 million data points a day. Now imagine that much data if not secured properly, because this data can change the face of biotech, because you can use this to do all kinds of research, drug development, biotech, everything. So I think it is important for us to protect this data before everybody else is going to use this data and create products, create medicines, create medical solutions, and potentially even create viruses which could only target specific gene pools. So that's the big risk of this.
I don't know, Vishal, it almost seems like there's a Black Mirror episode about to happen.
Well, they say reality is even worse than fiction, right? So all I can tell you is that Black Mirror has not got some of these things right.
Fair enough. But, you were talking about security of devices, but let's go to some of the practitioners. Wanted to understand, Arvind, what do you do to, or what should one do to mitigate risks to healthcare infrastructure? The impact that we've been talking about. What are the steps that one that you are taking, and what are the steps that healthcare institutions ought to take?
I think first this has the most important step is like what all the other speakers were talking of is first and foremost awareness. If you're just going to look at this as a technology problem or a policy problem, I'm not sure. We're probably finding a scapegoat to make this somebody else's problem. So unless this becomes a fundamental core DNA of all operations, of everybody involved in it, that's when you're going to have meaningful protection. And now looking at it only from what an organization has to do, I think the first part of it is look at security and privacy by design. And I know systems that are existing today may not have thought of all of this. Systems that exist today may not cater to some of the, I would say, ingenious ways by which people take control. Nobody would have thought certain things could happen. So I think relook at design, both from a privacy and security standpoint. The second aspect is constant monitoring. Obviously, there is no end to this in terms of there's no surety, but how can we make sure that we've done the best we can? How can we make sure that what we've done it with utmost responsibility? I think once we have that culture of responsibility, then we are talking of partnership for success. I think really building the organization in that front. And then definitely start looking at better governance policies that are not just reactive, but also what can be proactive, so that we can start ensuring that every activity we do is catered to also from a privacy and security standpoint. And I keep saying privacy and security because sometimes the lines between the two become pretty thin. So look at it in terms of how can we look at governing policies? Can loss of the land help in this? Definitely yes. Definitely yes. But I also would feel that I hate to say it, but I am going to. Helmets are mandatory in almost every state in India. How many of us have seen people wearing helmets on the roads?
But just to add to that, Arvind, just to add to that, like we can have the laws, but if attribution
come from within, you got to practice it. You got to practice it all around, and start having the responsibility of respecting those governance policies. Start respecting those policies where we follow the rules because they are meant for a purpose of good and protection. And that is a very, very important aspect of what we have to do. All sides of it. This is not a one-sided thing. This definitely, don't get me wrong, this is not a one-sided thing. I think all of us have equal stake in it to make this function effectively. With or without laws. Again, I'm not just going to say that, okay, there are no governing laws or there are no tight laws or the laws are conveniently translatable. You know what? I don't think maturity has that conversation. And the reason I say that is we're talking of health. We're talking of something personal. We're talking of something of utmost importance. Whatever be the state of health, even something as simple as common cold. It's not, just imagine if I've got a headache and a common cold, I wouldn't want to be photographed. Why? I don't know why, but that's common human behavior. It's intrinsic to all of us. So given something like that, I think we need to figure out how we can respect it. All the additional aspects of tighter laws, tighter governance will be definitely helpful. There's no question. But I just don't want to pin anything on it. And for organizations as a whole, I think look at it from the inside out and also from the outside in. It's not, I think that holistic aspect is really important. Unfortunately, there's no single recipe around this.
Understood. So, can you just go into a little bit about how COVID-19 impacted cybersecurity in healthcare? Like, what has the last year been like for the ecosystem or for the industry from a cybersecurity perspective?
We got the physical virus and you got the digital virus, and so it's been a complete. So yes, as much as we were physically struggling with a health system grappling to take care of people in several aspects of care, I think, and businesses were changing, all around. The extra activities, the extra spurt of activities, and I won't even call it extra, it's like a burst of activities that's happened on the industry space, not just the healthcare, on the industry space, primarily because working models were changing. And when working models were changing, very simple work from home techniques, people started finding alternate ways of working, connecting to work, and thereby connecting to information and transferring and translating information. Unknowingly, there were vulnerabilities caused, unknowingly. And also, not just unknowingly, people were grappling against time. They were racing against time because they had to get back to some sort of a business continuity. I won't even call it business as usual, but business continuity. So because of this, loopholes were caused. Knowingly, certain loopholes were there because you had to choose between doing certain things, and thereby, and exploitation of all of that was pretty rampant. So yes, it was a very difficult year for business to get onto its feet. It was an equally, magnified manner by which there were sects of people exploiting this kind of information also. So all around, would prefer a year where we can learn from, and prefer a year that can be forgotten forever.
It looks like it might get tougher with the years that come by, Arvind, unfortunately.
Yeah, true, very true. Can't agree.
So you'll have a very, very important and let's say a more expansive job to do going forward. But another person who's from the healthcare sector, Niranjan, I was just curious, just taking on from what Arvind was talking about capacity. What kind of budgets are allocated to data security in Indian healthcare institutions?
Hi, thanks, Nikhil. See, I used to, kind of answer this question in a lot of forums. What is the annual IT budget healthcare space? Is there any defined budget? Based on my previous understanding, like, wherever the organization I work for, like anywhere between 1.5 to 2% of turnover is for the maintenance budget, and 4 to 5% if it's a kind of a greenfield or complete revamp of IT, right? But within that, what's the percentage of budget that you're going to allot to cybersecurity or information security? Just a case like a couple of days back in our strategy meeting, they were asking for a projection for next 2 years. So we put some 110K worth of network and threat monitoring tool. The first question they say, Niranjan, why is this so much of money is assigned to this particular tool? Why don't you buy it next year? Can just skip that. So the first place where they wanted to remove the capex is cybersecurity. The reason is, I think it's not only the awareness part of it. Now I think because of a lot of news, people are to an extent they are aware of it. But I think what the assurance that they expect, which unfortunately the CISOs could not give, is if in case they assign that budget to me, if I buy that 110K worth of device, can I give an assurance that all our entire infrastructure and everything is completely secured? Honestly, answer is no, right? Because I think the people are trying to enter are much smarter than all of us, right? Because that's their full-time job, and they keep scanning the entire internet and the cloud and everywhere. For them, all they need is just only one door to enter. When we are trying to cover like 100 doors, they are just looking out for one door to enter, and it's much easier to do that. And another important aspect in one of my previous organizations we learned is the biggest the cause of any of the security compromise is the end user mistakes, which is extremely difficult for you to kind of continuously monitor and train, teach, because people keep coming and going out. A lot of turnovers in healthcare organizations, and there are different people. So
can you give me an example? Can you give me an example of what an end user mistake might look like?
For example, like, people, we clearly tell them, hey, you're not supposed to access the emails, where, if an unknown sender is coming, you're not supposed to register email IDs. outside of your network. People go and subscribe that, including for Facebooks and everywhere. They start getting a lot of spam emails. They open an attachment and then they try to click and they don't even tell anyone. Because see, in healthcare environment, if you look at it, there are night shifts, there are off times, etc. It's extremely difficult for you to kind of monitor them 24/7. And a guy sitting in the middle of the night, have nothing to do except just for monitoring, any kind of calls. You can expect them to kind of browse through and all that. Whatever the kind of filter you do, whatever the kind of support system you kind of give, governance system you can put in place, still there are ways and means for people to kind of go out of the network. And that one entry is good enough for you to get completely compromised.
So it sounds as if operational security is where the weakness lies. So what do you think can be done in order to strengthen cybersecurity as an organizational movement? And I'll come to you, Arvind, with the same question after the Niranjan response to it. Niranjan?
So yeah, just to though we both represent healthcare industry per se, both of us would definitely agree that number of CIOs or CISOs, if you really put together across the country, how many of us are really qualified CIOs or CISOs who are running or governing a healthcare organization? If you look at it, the percentage is very, very small, right? Most of the CIOs are head ITs. They are not the the real engineers coming from information security background, right? I don't think not more than 5% of the healthcare organization in India have a deputed, qualified, trained CISOs on board, right? We cannot even have a named security personnel. The number one point is, I think people should understand that one side, one of the report from Practo states that 500 times that the online, access to the applications have gone up during, beginning of COVID, right? So everybody started telehealth and telemedicine, teleconsultation, etc. So one side you want to go and reach out, and now every other organization is trying to really get into home care and wellness care, etc. They want to give the kit to the patient home and they want to monitor them, etc. And next 2 years, I can tell you all the aggregator companies are going to be focusing on the wellness and the home care kind of a model. One side you are trying to reach out to the patient, the other side, you need to know that the more you're opening up portability, the more you are going to open up the doors for security, kind of issues. So
I'll come to that aggregator question in a bit, but Arvind, on organizational security practices and what needs to be done in order to just in terms of OPSEC.
One is definitely ensure that across the board we educate every aspect, like what Niranjan was mentioning. Each person needs to understand what business function they are performing, which obviously they know very well because they are experts in that thing. But what are the pitfalls of what they are doing? So does the procurement team know what it takes when you get a phishing email that talks about a certain procurement pattern? Does the finance team know what it takes when you get a message with some sort of online payment link or a request for an online payment link? Does HR know what it takes when somebody says that they're looking for some employment? So do each of these roles in an organization understand the pitfalls? And if I may also put it in a little different way, do they actually understand and perceive the importance of the role they are playing, which is why they are targets? You're doing your job very well, which is really nice. But do you know how important it has? The magnitude of the importance of your job really sunk into you. I think that's a very, very important education aspect that starts with the fundamental structure of building organizational security models. And definitely looking at really what are your honest assessments, honest periodic assessments of what we can do, people, process, and technology. And completely agree with Niranjan. I'm going to spend X money on let's say information security. What guarantees can you give me? I'm sorry, nobody can play God. Nobody can, much that we would like to. At the same time, the same conversation in the reverse direction is also not to be entertained. How can we do to the maximum possible extent? So how can we assess periodically people, process, and technology honestly, because we are always shy and scared of a very honest self-assessment. And I think we need to do that just to keep ourselves at pace, to understand the risk. There may be certain risks that you are looking at in terms of risk mitigation also. Certain things you're looking at risk acceptance. In the previous session, you were asking a question on insurance and all of those. So you're looking at several options, but do you know what options you're looking at so that you can apply them appropriately? I think those are the organization governance rules that you have to look at. It's not just merely investment. It is just not merely having a very elegant and capable information security team. They are as strong as the weakest link. They're as strong as the weakest link. So it's not, you just can't do that. So I think we really need to look at it as layers of the organization, and we have to invest the time in doing that very honest self-assessment and start looking at a periodic way to mitigate them or to govern it better. That's really how I would put organizational readiness.
So a quick question to both you and Niranjan before I go back to Vishal and Pallavi, is about third-party platforms and third-party aggregators. That ecosystem seems to be expanding, and perhaps with the universal health interface that will expand even further. What kind of vulnerabilities creep in from third-party services, platform aggregators, and how does one strengthen the healthcare supply chain?
Nikhil,
because effectively your surface area for an exploit is increasing exponentially then, right?
Nikhil, whenever two people are talking, there's going to be lost communication. When three people are talking, they're going to be talking over each other. And when multiple people are talking, we're just going to have noise. Okay. That's the same when it comes to aggregating any number of applications. And I really don't want to call out third-party applications only. I won't really call them third-party applications. They are basically solution sets for which there is a need and a demand in a particular ecosystem and in a particular work process. So whenever there is communication between two systems or cross communication, I think there are loopholes that are instantaneously created. In the language of a cyber enthusiast, these are areas of opportunity. So the more we have that, the more it is going to be that. That doesn't mean that I shut myself and not integrate with anything. Then we are losing out on the vastness of digital transformation overall as an industry, not just again healthcare industry. Overall, we lose out. So I think we will have to look if all systems can follow the industry standard protocols that are relevant for the respective industries. If all industries can cater to the best practices that are there in those governing practices of the respective industry segment, whether it is the payment sector or whatever. Okay. I'm being careful. I'm looking at best practice. I'm not just saying something is certified or something like that, but follow the best principles. Then automatically you will start, your handshake is going to be that much more cleaner. So once that is much more cleaner, then you start looking at best practice operational activities. Merely having a technological clean way of working is not sufficient. You will have to look at operational ways. And then you will have to look at periodic governance methods, not audit. Please don't get me wrong. It's not like, okay, let's get the teams into a bunch of never-ending audits. We can kill people with audits. No, that's not what we are looking at. We look at better governance, proactive governance, so that it is built towards doing better, creating that culture towards doing better. So when we are looking at third-party platforms and applications, you're looking at increasing your horizons. That means let's follow discipline.
Niranjan?
Yeah, so I would start with the data governance as a key thing, right? For example, This morning I was asked to fill up a form for a milk vendor, like a government milk vendor. He gave me a form. He was, I was surprised to see some of the fields asking my Aadhaar card, my salary, my occupation, my net income, and all sorts of details. I was asking, you're just going to give me half a liter milk. What do you want to know how much salary I'm earning, and why do you need my Aadhaar card details? The same thing applies to the hospital. Now, whatever the information we ask from the patient, does it really make sense at every counter, at every place? So the data governance is very, very important. What information we are collecting, how sensitive they are, where we are storing, and that's number one. Number two, when it comes to the integration, I have experience both from the domestic market as well as the some developed market like US. If I have to really have a handshake with my third party machine or a software, we both organizations need to sign a business associate agreement. We both of us have to explain what kind of security systems we have within the organization. There is an independent audit that happens, and then the cloud infrastructure details have to be shared. And if I talk about an API or web service integration, I need to explain, justify each and every field that I ask from him or I want to give. Whereas in India, I can put my developer in from my team, talking to the third-party company's developer. Both of them can decide what information they want to share, where they want to kind of handshake. So that handshaking happens overnight. So I think the data governance and understanding on the sensitivity of the information is extremely important. Unfortunately, we are not yet there.
Vishal, what are the risks that, just on that third party integration and data collection side, but what are the risks that we now face with connected devices in healthcare, talking to other systems, and what do we need to do to address some of these risks?
So I think, unlike UPI, which was built on top of a banking system, which was already having some level of security, I think the health stack is going to have a massive explosion of problems, because it is being built on a system which underlying has no security or data it has no DNA of that layer at all. Healthcare data has never been that secure in the first place.
Well, Vishal, in fact, I'll just interrupt. There's a question from an anonymous attendee around this same thing, saying that the UHI, whose consultation paper has just come out, virtually proposes a center that can coordinate appointments and consults across healthcare facilities in the country. So that's probably hundreds of thousands of healthcare service providers. And, what does such an integration mean for cybersecurity? I think that's one of the things that you're addressing, right?
So personally, I think it's going to be a big challenge, because like I said, see, a lot of fraud in healthcare used to happen because of insurance and claims and all of that, right? Now, suddenly imagine that, I think the chances of fraud in this entire system is going to grow tenfold, because people will figure out by just getting somebody's OTP, I can generate some invoice there. And so, there might be hospital appointments booked in my name and your name in some small city and town. And, I just think that it is going to be very, very challenging, because there is no underlying security. Banking system, UPI already had security.
And we are seeing the same issues come up with UPI with fraud as well, right?
And UPI fraud, I'm saying it is built on something which is already secure. So I'm just saying that now think about something which is built on something completely non-secure. The second problem is, just imagine for the first time in the world, at least for us, when you have to travel abroad, people are asking your vaccination certificate, not your bank statement. Normally, visa ke liye, you had to give your 5-year bank statement and financial records. Suddenly, if you don't have a vaccine certificate, which is a piece of health information and health record now, which every citizen of India is now accessing in some or the other way. So we are seeing that how your health is soon going to become your gateway to access services, access visa to go and travel somewhere. Right. And now, if there are issues around this, if somebody has taken over your identity and got some fraudulent vaccine or has recorded something else, and suddenly all these systems are integrated, like Aadhaar data, your financial data acts into your CIBIL score, etc. So I just think that that this is going to create massive amount of confusion, and especially to this entire poorer segment who are not even savvy. And now I was told that people are trying to link their passport number to their vaccine certificate. That is the latest thing, because apparently there is a whole mess around that. So all I can say is that health data and financial data intertwining is also happening now, with integration with Aadhaar and your PAN number and stuff like that. So I don't know. I mean, I'm just concerned that we should secure this data, make sure that people are aware and everybody is aware. Otherwise, this is a complete recipe for a disaster.
Pallavi, Vishal's painting quite a dystopian picture, right? Going forward, what do you think needs to be done?
So yeah, unfortunately, I sort of agree with the dystopian picture that he's painting so far. In the sense, whatever is being done in the absence of any sort of regulation, right? There is nothing. Like he said, at least for the finance sector, you had some basic underlying regulation, something. We have nothing right now. And we are coming out with ways, for example, the health ID, which is now supposed to be voluntary, but as we all know, it's no longer voluntary. If you give your Aadhaar as registration, it becomes part of what you've given. And nobody's even informed about what the need for the health ID is. It sort of comes on your vaccine certificate. Now, and then linking your vaccine certificate right now is for international travel. You don't know where they will link it for employment services. We have no idea where and for how far this will go. And that's also I think Vishal also referred to it, is there's a huge digital divide, which unfortunately I wasn't able to refer to when I was speaking, is again, that's what's going to happen. For people who have not been able to get vaccinated, not getting vaccinated on time, or are not, so suppose your job, employers say you need to get vaccinated certificates if you can come and, come to offices, that's what's going to happen. So in places where you don't have, and it's going to be linked to your vaccine certificate, which you have to show, and there is already for example, when COVID came about, and because it was such a huge issue of, half the people not having internet access, and you needed to be on COVID to get registered, you had these APIs come about, and you had a lot of people you could get yourself registered, but a large number of people couldn't because they didn't have access to internet. So what I'm trying to say is that all of this is great, but in the digital divide that India is right now, such a digitization of health infrastructure doesn't really make too much sense unless we sort of have the proper digital infrastructure in place to ensure that there's no digital such, it doesn't continue. The denial of services doesn't continue because you don't have digital infrastructure in place, which might happen if I can't show I'm vaccinated, or I can't get vaccinated for whatever reason. That should not be the reason why, or I don't have a health ID. All of those should not be what should happen going forward. So, yeah.
So do you have any thoughts around disclosure norms? And because we've also the cybersecurity incidences last year have been mentioned in this discussion frequently, but we haven't seen many disclosures taking place. And do you think disclosure norms might lead to a sort of pressure on organizations to then also shore up their security?
Yeah, you're right. We haven't seen too much discussion about disclosure norms or about that. So that might really help organizations shore up and sort of make their cybersecurity norms better. That could be one way going forward. But I would keep harping back to it. It could be based on, you could say that organizations should do it, individuals should do it, or companies should do it. But at the end of the day, we do need regulations and we do need laws in place, so that if the organization doesn't do it, or the particular entity doesn't do it, where do I go for redressal? That needs to be taken into account, because just leaving it on self-regulation, leaving it to organization may not work. You need to have an encompassing some sort of regulation to see if this happens. The organization should do it. If they don't, what do we do about that? So they don't make the disclosures. How do I redress that? So that maybe should be one way going about it.
So there is, sorry, there were a couple of questions here that I think Arvind has already answered on chat, but Arvind, there are folks who are also viewing this online. I was just wondering if you could address Shaila's question on, where individual patients may have little choice to refuse information, and a lot of information is collected from them. Any thoughts on that aspect about what needs to be done so as to make sure that patients aren't forced to, expose themselves by being forced to disclose far more information?
Absolutely. I think this is where the workflows have to be done in a way where we capture information that is required for that work process. And also there's enough attempt made by the organization to make the consumer, the patient or their family members understand the purpose of why a particular information is being collected. I think all those are very important aspects. And second, this is the place, particularly I would say in healthcare, this is the place where you can start doing some amount of lean and Six Sigma processes, where you also start capturing the information at the points where they are required. Not just get a volume of information right at the doorstep. That may not be the right place to do it. So do it as relevant to the corresponding journey in the workflow. That will be more effective, that will be more time consuming, beneficial for the patient, that will be more reassuring, and that will also ensure that the patients are also declaring the right levels of information or the right nature of information, so that wrong declaration can also affect decision making many a time. So you look at it in all aspects, but pay attention to at what point of service you're asking what, and try to do the best job in explaining why, so that there is mutual respect for that whole process.
Right. And Anand has this, I think it's a point, not a question, but it seems to be rhetorical, saying that if you have Revel having a turnover of 150 million, then IT budget of 110K, how will this even work? What do you think is the ideal expenditure? This is for both you and Niranjan, that a healthcare organization should allocate in terms of percentage of revenue.
Very wrong question. Very wrong question. Not because I'm going to shy away from giving you numbers, which I'm definitely not going to attempt. But I think first, set your house in order. So you need to understand how much it takes. So first understand who you are, and what do you want, and what is it going to take for you. Boxing it all, starting with a cost conversation is not going to help. First understand what you want, and then look at what is your capability to spend, and then figure out how you can do. What is your distance from where you are to what you understand is a steady state. And then start talking about, in steady state, there will be so much percentage of a budget that you will be able to allocate. Understand between what business you're doing and what is the importance of that business to your work in terms of how much money it can be done. So for some people, that loss of that information could be small. So they might spend 0.5%. For some other set of people, that would be literally their business. So they might end up spending even 10 to 12% of it. So just going by a percent number is a very poor approach to managing the initial aspect of getting to speed with security and privacy, and also staying current in the steady state.
Niranjan and Arvind, perhaps you could also address this post this, but what do you think the healthcare industry needs to do as an industry to collaborate related to cybersecurity? And you know, what is it that can be done in terms of interfacing with other industries in order to make sure that systems, supply chains, hardware procurement, your third-party data collection, all of that remains secure?
See, one thing, since Arvind is also here, like aiding Chime and other organizations, like when the CIO clubs were conducting cybersecurity programs and events, I used to wonder, like, how come, healthcare is not really like even attending to. And last Sunday, we started the program for most of the CIOs and head ITs of hospitals and healthcare organizations to undergo a 5 weeks program. I think that's a good start, I would say, because at least you need to have few champions within the organization who understands, who goes beyond the kind of scope of what they deal with, and that they can learn from the other industries and bring it back to the healthcare industry. So programs like this, certification programs or awareness programs like this definitely makes a huge impact. Second thing is, we should extend this beyond to the CIOs. We should go to the CXO community as well. So they should understand it's not just, one of the organizations where we had problem with the ransomware, we were able to, handle it because we had the backup of the data. So it's not about just having a backup and not paying money, but, as we all talking about the sensitive information going out of our organization as well. So if I had to really argue with my CFO, hey, as long as there is a backup, let's just, ignore this particular threat, right? So we shouldn't be discussing that level. So the awareness should go beyond CIO, but it is to get into the CXO and board of management level. So that is the number 2. Number 3 is with more and more IoTs coming in within the organizations and integration with the medical devices. So the integrated security is more important, not just, internal security. I think that's very, very important aspect, I would say. And the third or fourth or final one would be the interoperability, because we are connecting with a lot of external third-party system, as you are saying. And we need to really have a, a policies across the organization. We should come together and understand if you are going to handshake with a portal like this and a device like this, what are the different steps that we should follow? And we should try and make it more structured rather than individual CIOs or individual tech heads take a decision there. So it has to be uniform across the organization. So bringing in any standardization or a certification program across the healthcare organization would really help a lot.
Arvind, just to add to that, how do you think the tech industry can partner with the healthcare industry?
Very surely, tech industry can make the solutions more affordable to the healthcare, as the general expectations are for lower costs on healthcare. So if tech industry starts making solutions more costly, that's more reasons why people will not do, because affordability of solutions will not be there. Second aspect, if tech industry can also make these solutions more functional in terms of support and its steady state, rather than make it sound perennially like rocket science that always needs more and more services around it, is also a reason why people shy away from solutions. So really, if tech industry can genuinely partner in solving the problem, I think that's the one and only request I would make, which I'm sorry to say today it's far from that stage.
So I'm going to close with one last question, and I just want a one-point answer from each of you. I'll start with you, Pallavi. If there was one policy change that you would want from the government in order to help, improve cybersecurity in healthcare, what would that be?
I would first say that get a data protection law, and a data protection law specific either, or just get a separate law on healthcare, which may not be the data protection law, which could be a particular law dealing with healthcare, because healthcare, and also make it a critical infrastructure service, which is important. We haven't yet designated as a critical, that we need to designate, especially in pandemic time, which is important. And maybe specifically have laws, because data protection law in itself may not sort of take care of all health eventualities, have maybe a separate health legislation, which takes into account cybersecurity concerns, data protection, privacy, all of that. So yeah, that would be my big one suggestion to the government if they listen.
Niranjan?
I would suggest there should be, an assessment program which should be made mandatory for all the healthcare organizations, and it could be a simple certification, it could be sponsored event or whatever it is. There should be an assessment program on the information and data security of all the healthcare organizations, especially when they deal with patient information.
Arvind?
I would say draconian law for anybody who works on data or brings out products or services that's built on data that is not acquired through an official channel. So if you close the need for a data market, then somebody saying that records are worth 500 rupees or whatever was the number put would be automatically switched off. So draconian law for any product or service or any aspect of business that is built on, if I may call it, not properly acquired data.
Vishal?
So see, in the financial world, there is RBI, there is SEBI, there is Economics of Offenses Unit, there is ED. There are so many regulators, enforcers, and there is an assumption that people are afraid of the law because they are going to be challenged by some regulator or somebody. Problem with healthcare is nobody knows who's in control. There is Ministry of Health, there is Ayush, there is Fit India, there is Health Ministry, Sports Ministry, then hospitals have different, doctors have different, Baba Ramdev is saying something else. So the problem right now is that, who is in control of health and who is in control of our health data, who is afraid of whom, nobody knows. So while we have the privacy bill, etc., there needs to have both judicial and government and police and all these enforcers. Otherwise, this is all going to be theoretical because people will not want to spend money. The reason you spend money in compliance is if you are afraid of the consequences. Right now, there are no consequences.
As always, Vishal, you've given me a headline. But I'm going to end with this panel, and thank you all for a fantastic discussion with a message that I just received privately, and it's a compelling challenge, right? I'm going to paraphrase it, but it says that how do you balance between innovation and trying to become the top country in terms of technology, and as well as maintain data privacy and security. And I think that's the challenge of India as it continues this path of rapid digitization, and with new systems coming across payments, healthcare, education, lending, and now even transportation, because we seem to be compromising security for fast-paced ICT growth. But thank you all for a fantastic panel. We'll move to the closing panel, and we have the privilege of having Ambassador Lata Reddy join us. She's the co-chair of the Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace. She's the former Deputy National Security Advisor of India, where she was responsible for cybersecurity and other critical internal and external security issues. She's also served as the Commissioner of the Global Commission on Internet Governance and the Ambassador of India to Portugal and Thailand. Ms. Reddy has extensive experience in foreign policy and in bilateral, regional, and multilateral negotiations. She has expertise in security and strategic issues and has worked on strategic technology policies, particularly on cyber issues related to cybersecurity policy, international cybersecurity cooperation, and internet governance. She is currently, among other positions, serving as a distinguished fellow in the East-West Institute in the US and the Observer Research Foundation in India. It's a great privilege for us to have you here, Ambassador Reddy. We're very keen to hear from you on what you think about how global cyber policy needs to evolve with respect to healthcare. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nikhil. And thanks again to your institute, MediaNama, and to the CyberPeace Institute for giving me this opportunity to speak on a subject which I think is very, very important, which is cybersecurity and healthcare. I'd like to start by talking a little bit about the report by the CyberPeace Institute. As all at the CyberPeace Institute know, this has been something on which I have spoken in the past as well. And I was fascinated by their report on healthcare and cybersecurity, which is titled, and this I think is important, Playing with Lives, Cyber Attacks on Healthcare Are Attacks on People. I think in our discussion of all the technical and technology-related aspects of how we control data, we must not lose sight of the fact that this has very genuine effects on our people, on our citizens, on individuals. We need to focus also on the impact of attacks from a human perspective. It's not just a technical approach, we need a human approach. In the end, it's a report about health, and about the fact that health of every individual is at stake when we talk about these issues. And I've listened with great interest right from the beginning of the session, to all the presentations made, the panel discussion, which was fascinating, coming from different points of view, and the excellent presentation by Bruno on behalf of the CyberPeace Institute. And what I would really like to do is to come up with a list of issues which I think have emerged from the discussion, rather than a brand new point, because I think that there's not much which has not been touched on. The question is, how do we distill it down to what we ought to be doing? So let me begin with a very simple idea. We need to increase cyber hygiene across all institutions in healthcare. We need to make people understand what is the purpose of cyber hygiene, whether it's the patients who are sharing their data, whether it's the institutions that are sharing data. Because if you don't do that, effectively, you can't protect the data. The cyber hygiene, I would say, is an important issue. The second issue, which has been touched on by previous speakers, is you must build security into design, both for healthcare devices and for the platforms that healthcare institutions are using. If you don't have that security in design, if you go back and try to introduce security, it's always a much more complex process, as we all know. Therefore, you need to really build the security into the design of the platforms. The third aspect, which again we have talked about, is the very inadequate budget in most healthcare institutions for cybersecurity. Dr. General Pant mentioned that only 5% on an average is being used by healthcare institutions in India of their total budget on cybersecurity, whereas banks, for instance, are spending 15 to 20%. So the question is, how do we encourage more spending on cybersecurity in healthcare? And could this be made obligatory? Can we actually prescribe a limit? Or do we simply encourage it? Do you reward institutions that do effectively spend on healthcare institutions for against cyber attacks? I think the other aspect which I personally feel very strongly about is, while government may have the right to make to take up any issue as critical information infrastructure, I think it's necessary to specifically say healthcare is a critical information infrastructure. If you don't do that, it won't automatically be taken seriously. In the 7 areas which the NCII-IPC has in fact identified, healthcare is not among those. I think you need to add that specifically through a Gazette notification, because if there's one thing that this past year and a half has shown us, it is that healthcare matters. And it matters at least as much as transport and other areas which have been specifically identified. So we really must add healthcare to the critical information infrastructure, I would say, both nationally, and we should encourage it internationally as well, that this should become an obligatory area. I think we need to create the cyber crisis management plans for all agencies and organizations in healthcare. Perhaps this has to be mandated because, by and large, if it's just a recommendation, it may be ignored. But and I'll come to how we do this a little later when I'm discussing what I see as takeaways from this session. I think standards must be consolidated and they must be laid down for all healthcare institutions and organizations. I admit it's difficult because you have everything ranging from a small district health center to a huge multi-speciality hospital with much more resources. Perhaps some system of graded standards could be evolved depending on the size and the capacity of the institution. But I think consolidated standards are important. As we know, right now, some institutions are following ICD-10, some are following SNOMED CT, and some don't follow any standards at all. So unless there's a specific standard laid down for healthcare institutions, or standard or list of standards which should be followed by different institutions in healthcare, I think we're going to fall short on this matter. I think building a robust cybersecurity infrastructure and framework is obviously very important for each healthcare institution. And they're self-explanatory why we need that. I think everything that's gone before in our discussions has shown that without that, nothing else will work. And I think the point made by one of the panelists earlier that you have the RBI for the financial institutions and banks, and perhaps we need a coordinating agency like this for healthcare. Because without that, all these ideas are very good, but how are you going to implement them? How are you going to make sure that there are consequences to violating them? How are you going to create the regulatory mechanisms that you need? Unless you find either create or transform one of the existing institutions, perhaps the Union Health Ministry could be one area, perhaps a separate agency could be created under the Union Health Ministry, which then specifically looks at this aspect of regulatory controls which are mandatory for the country. And I think this is a model which could be replicated in many countries. It already exists in some countries. We should study the systems that are there, and they, I certainly believe that there's no need to reinvent the wheel. If you find a system that's working well elsewhere, adopt it, with suitable modifications for our local conditions. The other thing which I think would help would if we were to create a sectoral CERT or a computer emergency response team specifically for healthcare. I don't think at the moment we have a sectoral CERT for healthcare as far as I'm aware. And I think one at the national level and then one at each state level would help us cope in situations like what we find ourselves in now with the pandemic. If we want to protect our data and other aspects from cyber attacks. I think we definitely need more training of cybersecurity professionals. And perhaps at some point, we need to also bring in some familiarity with medical technology, because the kind of frameworks that need to be built for health institutions may be different from the frameworks that are being built for others. I mean, you can talk about data being agnostic in that sense, but I still think some domain expertise may be required for this, to marry it together in a harmonious way. I think you have to clearly look at all the health sectors at risk, which will include laboratories, vaccine manufacturers, hospitals, medical services, health insurance, biomedical research institutes, universities, pharmaceutical companies, and finally, the patients themselves, because I think all of these aspects have to be covered when we are looking at what is the risk factors involved, right? Then let's go on to the ransomware attacks. I agree with General Pant and with others who have said this is the year of ransomware. The very fact that 2018, the average ransomware demanded was $6,000, and today you're talking about over $200,000. I think makes it clear that ransomware, and I think this was brought out in the CPI presentation as well, that ransomware would rank number one. So how do we protect against these? Are there specific insurance policies that institutions can take out to guard against ransomware payments that they may be forced to make? Would that be legal? You know, can you pay ransom to criminals under a legal system? Would the insurance company cover that? I think these are issues that need to be discussed, because institutions need to protect themselves, you know, also. And some of the larger institutions which may be public companies and so on, you know, are answerable to their shareholders and investors as well. And we certainly don't want a situation where the healthcare institutions start to go bankrupt. So what kind of protection can they get against such attacks? I think we need to, of course, build specific defenses against cyber espionage. It could be espionage by hackers, it could be espionage by states, it could be espionage, you know, for the sake of collecting intellectual property and stealing, you know, technology. So I think that is an aspect that would have to be looked at. I think we need a game plan to respond swiftly to the disinformation infodemic, as it's called. I think we need to contradict the false narrative straight away. That's very important. You know, get the truth out there. Share verified, accurate, detailed information. And we need to have an alternative narrative strategy, which is ready to swing into place. Based, again, as I said, on facts, verifiable facts. And definitely we need national, as well as regional, as well as global regulatory mechanisms to be established. And I would say we need, I would agree with, I think it was Pallavi who made this point, that we need a sector-specific legislation, bill, whatever you want to call it, act for healthcare. A new legislation is required. It should clearly be designated that this is for the purposes of regulating healthcare. You know, that if you don't have that, then, you know, again, it's a chicken and an egg situation. Who is going to enforce it? I think the Data Protection Agency in India and similar organizations in other countries should have a specific division dealing with healthcare issues exclusively, because that's very important. You know, again, because data has become, healthcare data has become so important in recent months. Now, General Pant did mention that I would talk a little bit about the international cooperation aspect. I do think we do need more international cooperation on healthcare. I was encouraged to see the call by 51 leaders, world leaders, calling for more cooperation. And I think 25 leaders of countries have specifically written and called for international cooperation in this area. But what we may need, perhaps, is finally an international treaty for dealing with pandemics and other health crises. And I would say that no one is safe until everyone is safe. This has been said in many fora by many people before. But it is truly a fact of life in the globalized world we live in, that unless we take a global international approach towards healthcare issues, we are not going to be able to, you know, essentially, sorry, I'm getting some message in between. something about filter keys, good old technology. So my question is, could this be rooted in the WHO constitution? I think this has been suggested as well as other key organizations. We could look at what they've got by way of regulations for international cooperation. Can the UN itself be the forum? Or do we look at a multi-sectoral fora to be established? Do we use existing international health regulations for underpinning such a treaty? I think these are questions that need to be answered, but until and unless there's a very detailed international discussion on these issues and in a proper regulated forum, I think it's not going to be easily possible to come forward with the answers. Given the time constraints, Nikhil, I really have come to the end of my recommendations. Unless there's a specific issue on which one of you would like to engage me, I think I will conclude here.
Thank you, ma'am. There is, I mean, my questions were largely around international cooperation.
Yeah.
And what we need to do there in order to make cybersecurity in healthcare an important global priority and give it some sort of protected status, But I'm also, there are some comments by Anand Venkatarayanan in the Q&A. I'm also very cognizant of what he points out, saying that some of these attacks are often adversarial. They are often targeted attacks in order to compromise institutions, compromise both public and private entities. And if a breach is inevitable, and attribution is so difficult, how do you deal with such a situation? I'm struggling to think of a solution here. He suggests that we should begin with encryption and data minimization as a key part of the solution. What would be your view, ma'am?
Well, I think, attribution is really very key when you try to identify where the attacks are coming from. My own feeling is that first you need to figure out who is initiated the attack, right? Is it a random group of hackers? Is it an organized criminal entity which is trying to extract money? Or is it a nation state itself, which for adversarial reasons would like to see the systems compromised in your country? So I think the real issue is we need to develop our attribution capabilities. And once we have developed the attribution capabilities, then we have to have the political will to actually take action accordingly, depending on what you find out. So I personally, don't think that, taking the approach, as far as I can see, it's Anand, right, who answered, who raised this question.
Yes.
And he says,
he's essentially talking about data minimization as a solution. I brought in the attribution angle, ma'am.
Attribution, yeah. So I think, yes, encryption is a possibility, and certainly data is always safer when it's encrypted. And minimization, I don't know, can we go back to the old paper and pen route? Can we start again from scratch? Because we all know the problems that there are, with the same test being repeated again and again when you try to keep data physically. In many ways, it's become a much more comprehensive data set, which makes healthcare solutions easier when we don't minimize the amount of data being stored. You have to weigh the risks and take an informed choice after that. But, I think that if we take the other steps that I've mentioned, build up robust infrastructures, create a good defense mechanism, have a standard operating procedure, have people who are held responsible for the breaches, have systems that can come forward to help you, like the search. And there are organizations like the CPI who are trying to run a group of NGOs who can also help with mitigating risks and helping to repair the damage in each country. I would defer to the representative of CPI to comment on that aspect. But I personally think we'll have to use a mix of tactics, to deal with these issues. And I'm not sure that simply going back to the old days where we felt that unless something was written by hand and there was only one copy and it was kept under physical lock and key, that's, I don't think, really the answer. We have to find a way to make this space safer, because the technology is amazing and what we're able to do with data is amazing. But the question is, how do we prevent misuse of data?
One last question, ma'am. What would you see, and especially given the surface area of data that India has, what would you see India's role in trying to put together norms in terms of securing healthcare at a global forum?
I think, the question is, first, the global forum has to be created, obviously, and once it's there, India has a good record of participating in all global fora. I can tell you from personal experience of having interacted with the UN in different capacities that India's input is always welcome, because in some ways we're seen as a country that can talk to all countries, can talk to different points of view, and we don't have a very rigid ideology in that sense. But I would say that I'm afraid I've lost the thread of your question. Yeah.
Ma'am, I was just asking about what India's role would be
in international cooperation. Yeah. So, I think that basically India could play a role, as for the reasons I mentioned, that, we talk to everyone. We're seen both as an emerging advanced country. We're seen as a huge population. We're seen as, particularly where cyber issues are concerned, India is seen as a major player because of the fact that we simply have one of the largest data sets in the world. So I think India would be listened to, let me put it that way, and India's position would be of interest to others. So just from that point of view, once a forum is created, I think India would certainly be part of it. India has been very active in the UN Global Group of Experts on ICT, in the open-ended working group in the UN. Yes. And we work very closely with organizations like the WHO on our immunization programs and so on. So I don't see any reason why India should not be active, internationally, or in creating some kind of consensus on healthcare protection.
Great, ma'am. Thank you so much for your inputs, and thank you for putting together almost a checklist of what ought to be done, and your guidance to the sector. Really appreciate your taking time out to address this important discussion. Thank you all for joining us. I'd also like to thank Lieutenant General Dr. Rajesh Pant, Pallavi Bedi, Arvind Sivaramakrishnan, Niranjan Ramakrishnan, Vishal Gondal for their views. Also would like from the CyberPeace Institute to thank Bruno, Camilla, and Francisca for their support for this discussion, as well as Charu and Facebook for their guidance and support. I hope this discussion gives us all food for thought regarding what needs to be done to strengthen cybersecurity in healthcare, especially at such a critical time globally. There is there is a comment, by Aarti saying that this webinar should be a start to a very fruitful discussion on securing healthcare data. And I think that we need to have many more such conversations going forward. We will be writing about this discussion on MediaNama and also compiling the comments we've received into a report. If you wish to revisit the stream for this discussion, it's on MediaNama's YouTube channel. Thank you all for your support. Thank you for joining us. Please do subscribe to MediaNama. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure being here. And thanks again.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thanks, Bruno.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed this discussion today and looking forward for additional ones.
Thank you. Give my regards to Stefan and to Marice, please. Okay, bye.